Hello everyone, I'm Daz and welcome to American Civil War and UK History. This presentation is available as a video on our YouTube channel or as a podcast from wherever you get your podcast from. And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button and give us a big thumbs up. And to keep up to date with everything American Civil War and UK history, check out our website where you find blog posts, podcasts and links to all of our social media pages. Joining me today is author and historian Mark Turbull. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Daz. Yeah, thanks for having us back on the show.
No worries. And of course, in today's episode, we will be discussing the Battle of Edge Hill, which took place on October the 23rd, 1642. I have to train myself not to say 18, because that's what I normally do, you know. I nearly said it. And it is the first pitched battle of the English Civil Wars, or also known as the War of the Three Kingdoms, or the British Civil Wars, we should probably call it. Okay, Mark, let's start with, can you just, and again, this is going to be really difficult in a short little period of time, because the English Civil War is very complicated, but can you try and explain a little overview of what led to the outbreak of the English Civil War, if you wouldn't mind, please?
Yeah, well, I always stem it straight back to 1625. So you've got Charles I's accession to the throne. His father, James VI and First, died. You've got a huge period where the three crowns have come together, the three kingdoms under one crown, so England, Scotland, Ireland. And it starts there. So as soon as Charles inherits that throne, Parliament, the English Parliament, say that they are not going to grant him the customary tonnage and poundage revenues that all of his predecessors have had for life on their accession. And that starts this complete catastrophic situation where this new king and his government can't continue. They've inherited £1 million worth of debt from the time. Parliament is striking out and saying they want some change. You know, they want more of a say. There's religious, constitutional issues. And from there, it gets gradually worse. The king feels humiliated. And it gets to the point where they are derailing his plans to go to war with Catholic Spain and France. He's stumping up money. He's mortgaging his lands, you know, to the point where there's nothing left for the crown. And these wars with Spain and France are disastrous as a result. They're not equipped properly. And it's a spiral from there. I mean, you get to the point in 1629 where Charles gets rid of Parliament altogether and decides to go it alone. And then you have sort of 11 years of Charles ruling on his own. Europe's tearing itself apart. Three kingdoms, relative peace and stability. And meanwhile, Charles is trying to unify the three kingdoms. And this is the Stuarts. They've inherited these three kingdoms. They want them politically and religiously unified as much as they can. It starts to work in Ireland for Charles, at least. You know, it's reformed along the lines of the Church of England. That's the base that he's using. And then they move to Scotland, and then the plan goes wrong. So the prayer book in Scotland's reformed once or twice successfully-ish. But a further reform leads to a widespread protest. A national covenant is signed, and Charles finds that there is huge amounts of the Scots that stand up and say, no, we're not happy with this. It leads to a war where Charles manages, against all the odds, to assemble a force to call the First Bishops' War in 1639. He goes against the Covenanters. They have their own army. Both sides are manoeuvring, and they watch each other on the border. Nobody wants to fire the first shot and invade. You know, the Covenanters don't want to cross into England. Charles doesn't want to lead the English army into Scotland. An uneasy truce is signed, but the treasury's gone. No money left, and the Covenanters, there's another war in 1640. Covenanters do cross into England, and that is a huge problem. Charles doesn't have enough money to pay the money that they are demanding. Parliament is recalled in England, and from there, Parliament pick up their grievances. And this time, the king's got no room to manoeuvre. There's a lot of demands. He starts to make concessions, and then it just seems to be more and more and more that is demanded, to the point where he's given up crown powers. He's having his most able minister executed to try and satisfy the parliamentary leaders, and there's no avail there. To the point where it just both sides cannot trust each other. It's a case of they're all in, the chips are all in, and it eventually gets to the point where war is breaking out, skirmishes, and it just takes something official. Parliament then makes statements saying that they were going to live and die in their cause. They're going to rescue the king, and the king is then forced to raise his standard and say, right, there's an army of 15,000 under Parliament. They're traitors. There's now formal war declared in 1642. Hopefully that's a bit of
that's fantastic. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And again, you could spend many podcasts discussing that, can you, Mark? Yeah, so well explained there. Okay, so the war starts, but just before the war starts, can you just try and explain a little bit about how they got their armies together? Because this is a different time period, and armies are not really a professional force at this point, are they? So explain how that worked for both sides.
Yeah, and this is the thing with the civil wars. They're both in the same position. You have got, if you've got a big city or a very big town, they may have trained bands, and depending on the local commander and how effective they are and how dedicated they are, they could be mustered regularly. So those trained bands might have more understanding of how to handle their weapons, the drill. But mostly you haven't got that. Weaponry is out of date. Trained bands haven't been mustered. London is by far and away the best set of trained bands. And both sides, the law or the king has the right to raise troops. The king has the right. Now, Parliament, as their relationship degenerates in early 1642, Parliament strike at that right, and they say they push the king and say that he must hand that power over to Parliament. And the king naturally says, "Well, no, that's a." Parliament feel threatened. They want to take that power off the king. The king equally feels threatened, saying, "Well, if I give that up, what security do I have?" And in the end, Parliament do something really radical. They say, right, well, we're just going to vote on whether that power should be with us in Parliament. And that, the House of Commons absolutely passes that. The House of Lords are a bit more wary because they understand the precedent here that they might be setting. They still pass it. And then it becomes an ordinance. So Parliament are really just saying that they're going to do it. They don't need royal assent. And they are now in control of the militia. And Charles doesn't agree with that, obviously. And you get a point as we come to the Civil War where both sides are raising men based on their own authority. So Parliament's militia ordinance, that's been used as a tool to raise men in their cause. And the king goes back to the more traditional commissions of array, which are read out, and he raises troops in that way. And there's total clashes across the country. Because depending on, where you are in the country, what the loyalties are, the local landowners, things like that, there's a lot of dependencies on who's going to get that document read out first. Is it a parliamentarian that's going to get there first and read out the militia ordinance or not? And that's how they raise their troops.
Excellent. And that's really got my brain going now. So basically, if your lord is loyal to the royalists, you don't really have a lot of choice, do you?
Well, that's right. The ordinary soldiers didn't have a choice. You have Parliament when they vote the militia ordinance through. They start appointing Lords Lieutenants who are in control of the trained bands in each county. Again, the king has traditionally had the right to appoint those. Parliament take that on themselves, and that's when you have battles where people think, well, who do I take note of? the current Lord Lieutenant or the candidate the Parliament's proposing. There's even battles in court, in the southwest. It goes to court, and they have to settle it that way.
So it gets really, really, really interesting. That is interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the key figures during this particular campaign. And so the campaign we're talking about is the Edge Hill campaign itself. So now these are three of the main guys that are going to take part and lead the armies into Battle Edge Hill, aren't they? So
Yep.
just give us a little bit of background on these guys.
Okay, so we've got King Charles I on the left. So he's the Captain General. He's sort of the figurehead of the Royalist cause. He doesn't lead initial charges, and his advisors are telling him that he must withdraw off the field before the battle starts, but he refuses. He's very much part of the Royalist army. There's points where he rallies the Royalists when they are struggling. His footman, I think, is shot by his side. So he's in there. There's the parliamentarian artillery are firing at him. It was documented that they're trying to fire at the king as he's riding through his army to rally them and to give them a pre-battle speech. Prince Rupert in the centre. So he isn't the overall commander of the Royals. He's not the Lord General. But he's general of the horse, so he's in charge of the Royalist cavalry, reporting directly to the king. And he is at Edge Hill in command of the Royalist right wing of horse. And he's Charles's nephew. He's 22 years old. He's very, very self-assured, very confident. He's got a lot of experience from the European wars. He served 3 years as a prisoner to the Catholic Emperor, Holy Roman Emperor. He is a catalyst for the Royalists. It's widely seen by Parliament that Charles is more resolute. His cause is he's able to wage this war, because it was very doubtful that he would even raise enough men to have a battle. But he gets there, and that's primarily due to Rupert. And then we've got on the right there, we've got the Earl of Essex. So he is the commander of the parliamentarian army. He's voted, he's got the stature being an earl. He's got military experience from the Low Countries and from the Bishops' Wars we mentioned earlier, So he is in command, Lord General of the parliamentarian armies.
Excellent, thank you. And of course, there is, and people might not know this, but if you're a proper English Civil War buff, you will, that there is a skirmish before Edge Hill, isn't there? So the skirmish of Powick Bridge, I think I've said that right. So Mark, would you like to tell us a little bit about that battle, please?
Yeah, and this is great because the battle that you'd often read about, Powick Bridge, in history books, is always along the lines of what the Earl of Clarendon, so Edward Hyde, later Earl of Clarendon, in his mammoth history of the Great Rebellion, he's written a narrative of what happened. And recent studies have showed that that's full of holes. It's not accurate. Eyewitness accounts differ completely. So Powick Bridge comes about because war's declared. The king is raising troops because he's significantly outnumbered at that in the early stages. He is up, I think it's Shrewsbury. Rupert then takes a detachment of men south, and he goes to protect Lord Byron. Now, Lord Byron's been to Oxford. Oxford doesn't really have defences, so both sides, occupy it, and then it gets reoccupied by the other side, and that goes on quite a bit in these early months. But the Royalists managed to get a lot of silver from Oxford, silver plate. So the university, for example, donated, and Lord Byron takes this booty and he races out of Oxford. He's been pursued by Essex and the entire parliamentarian army, and he races west to Worcester, and Worcester's not very well defended either. So Rupert's coming south from Shrewsbury. He's been sent by the king to escort Byron away because money. The royalists are in really deep demand and need of money. Parliament's got London, so they're in a much better position. So yeah, we've got Rupert coming south to protect Byron. They both converge on Worcester. Essex and the Parliamentarian army are heading to Worcester. And what the parliamentarians want to do is to cut off Byron and this treasure train from heading north. So they send a detachment of around 1,000 or 1,500 men under Colonel Sands and Colonel Brown, and they send them to the sort of southwest of Worcester to Powick. And this is to try and cut off Rupert and Byron's route. And now Byron does manage to escape, but Rupert decides to confront them. And he wants to really show that the royalists mean business. The royalists can handle themselves well. They've got themselves into a position where they can fight back. So he seeks them out. Now, Clarendon, in the histories, he says that Powick Bridge was a total accident. So Rupert knows that there's somewhere around there. He goes to look. He doesn't think that they're anywhere near, and he takes his armor off. He lies in this field, him and his commanders and his brother, and then they hear shots, and then they're surprised to find that Sands and Brown are there. And then Rupert's meant to sort of jump on his horse, ride into battle without looking back, not even putting his armor on, and luckily enough wins. But that's not how it was. And when this reevaluation that John Spiller did in 2022, he looked at eyewitness accounts, it became obvious that Powick Bridge, Rupert did have a really, really tight plan. So we haven't got this reckless 22-year-old, which we're all too familiar with, with he's portrayed in that way. What Rupert does is he approaches Powick and he sends a false message to Sands. And the false message is sort of saying, from Essex, the commander of the Parliamentarian army, we've defeated the royalists. The Cavaliers have been defeated. Rejoin the army. Now, Sands falls for this, and he leads his men to Powick Bridge. Now, Rupert, in the meantime, he's stationed musketeers in the hedges. He's drawn up ready in the field for Sands and the Parliamentarians to come across. And when that happens, Sands is ambushed by the musketeers. They've waited. The royalists are saying that they've waited there in silence, as quiet as can be, to lure them into the trap. And Rupert, this is tried and tested tactics that he continues in the war. He lets just a certain number of parliamentarians with Sands cross the bridge, and because the forces are roughly equal. 1,000 to 1,500 each. So he lets enough cross so that he's not equalized in numbers and that the numbers are inferior, and then he attacks. So he's chosen where he's going to attack. He's chosen how many people he's going to attack. He's ambushed them. He's got them on the back foot. And it's over in around 15 minutes. But the consequences of Powick Bridge are huge. Rupert becomes feared. The parliamentarians think that he's capable of anything. The royalists are heartened by it. It's the first sort of official action. It really puts the parliamentarians on the back foot. And Essex's own lifeguard are engaged there, and they don't come off very well. So it's significant.
Okay, so this gives, as you said, the royalists a real sort of a boost in confidence. So is that why they're then going to pursue their route to London and make their way towards London? Was that the reason why?
Partly, yeah. I think because Rupert had already secured permission from the king to attack, but what the king said is, just look after your men, because we are still waiting for a full battle. I think there's an intention. We've got to try and cut off the Earl of Essex's army from London if we've got any hope of taking the capital back. And it gets to the point where both sides as well, there's also a feeling, this age-old phrase, it could be over by Christmas. So a lot of people think one big clash, one big pitched battle, it might settle it, and it might actually, bloodlet. It might force people to the negotiating table and that sort of thing. So yeah, both sides I think are really, they recognise the need to do battle, and then that comes off at Edge Hill.
Mm-hmm. And so these are at this battle, Powick Bridge is the first shots of the English Civil War. Then
it's difficult to say that precisely because you have sort of unofficial clashes and small skirmishes and things all over the country. But really, this is the first proper test, I think. This is the Royalist cavalry coming up against the detachment of this 15,000 strong parliamentarian army. And the king had been thought to be much inferior in numbers. But yeah, Powick really, it's the first significant clash.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Mark. Cheers. Okay, so let's talk about again. So, as you know, I mentioned London there, and like you said, they're trying to cut them off. And it's, am I right in saying it's sort of like a bit of an accidental meeting, Edge Hill, in a way? Is that right? So, how do both armies actually get there, and how does it end up being in the Warwickshire countryside?
Yeah, they are looking for each other, and they're not entirely certain where each other are, where each other's armies are located. So you have Essex, for example. He's going to church on the morning, and then he gets told suddenly, the Royalists are at Edge Hill. So he has to quickly, draw his men up, and the Royalists, for their part, Rupert is really searching for them. Rupert wants that battle. And he is chivying the king. He's chivying all of the royalists along, saying, the infantry need to catch up. He'll occupy the hill. Rupert really wants to just go in with the cavalry and take them in, and then, see what he can achieve. But he's told, no, it's not your position to do that. You need the king's permission. You can't take the cavalry in without the infantry coming up. So yeah, both sides quickly realise where they are, how close they are, and the Royalists have occupied Edge Hill, and Essex draws his men up in the fields at the foot of Edge Hill.
Okay, cool, thank you. Okay, so we do get to the Battle of Edge Hill, October the 23rd. But just before that, I want to go back to a previous slide because I put it in the wrong place. I want to talk about this famous painting. So this is the eve before the Battle of Edge Hill. So what can you tell us about this?
It's a stunning picture, isn't it? But it gives this air of sort of organized, nice, polite. Mm-hmm. I think it's just the artist's wish to portray a nice scene, because it wasn't really like this. Yeah.
No.
We've just mentioned there that it was very much, they didn't know where exactly they were until suddenly, they spotted each other and they were very close. The king's not with Rupert, so Rupert's there first. He's waiting for the infantry to come up. He's impatient. He's waiting, hours. And the actual meeting, so you have the king, for example, gives a speech to his officers in his tent. He says that I'm your cause and your captain and your quarrel. I'll forever keep this field in grateful memory. He then rides to his men when they eventually do get drawn up. But there is a real dispute between the Royalist High Command, so not this image here. In actual fact, when it comes to drawing the army up, the King's Lord General, the Earl of Lindsey, he wants to adopt the Dutch style of tactics, which is more traditional, and that's what Parliament adopt. And Essex in the Parliamentarian army, like Lindsey, they've fought in the Low Countries, and this Dutch style was adopted by the Prince of Orange. So they are using that now. Rupert is thinking more about Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden, and his Swedish style of tactics and formations, and he advocates that. And there's a clash. So Lindsay's saying, well, he's the Lord General, he should determine it. The king sides with his nephew in the end and says, yeah, we'll go with the Swedish formation. And Lindsay chucks his baton onto the ground, his field marshal's baton, and says, if I can't be Lord General, I'll fight at the head of my regiment as a colonel. And the king, he does not like discord. Even to the point where his courtiers, if there's marital disputes, he's trying to sort it out. He's trying to influence and negotiate. So this, on the day of a battle, with his Lord General resigning in such spectacular fashion, who's also a very close friend, he's got a situation. He can't give that top job to Rupert. Rupert is too young, too inexperienced for such a political position. And there's a lot of people that wouldn't be happy with Rupert having that. So he gives it to a Scotsman, the Earl of Forth. And he absolutely agrees with Rupert about these Swedish formations. So yeah, the royalists are in a lot of disarray initially, but they soon get over that. And Lindsay stays true to his word. He goes to the head of his regiment.
And so what I'm envisioning is this is how Charles envisioned the meeting at the time. What do you reckon? You'll get away with that?
I don't think Charles, because this picture was painted long after.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not sort of royalist propaganda, because this is 100, 200 years after. But yeah, it's the artists trying to convey a nice settled scene of the royalists there. I mean,
it's still a beautiful picture, though. That's for sure.
It is absolutely. Yeah. There's Rupert on his. I think he's on a stool or kneeling down there with the battle plans and things.
So this definitely didn't happen. But definitely didn't happen. But anyway, let's talk about the actual Battle of Edgehill. So how the two armies line themselves up and get ready for the first pitched battle of the English Civil Wars.
Yeah, so both, as an overview, both are adopting the traditional formations with the infantry in the centre, and on each side of the infantry you've got a cavalry wing. But the royalists are on top of Edgehill, so a 650-foot escarpment. And the Earl of Essex is drawn up on the flatlands below. Now, nothing happens, because Essex is not going to risk attacking uphill. So he doesn't go on the offensive. The royalists, they want a battle, but they can see it's not going to happen. So eventually, they agree that they're going to have to come down the hill. So they march down Edgehill and redeploy opposite Essex's army. So, they're coming down off the hill. And at that point, again, the royalists are told, do not fire the first shot. The king doesn't want the first shot fired from his army. He's riding from one wing of the army to the other, and it's only then that the Earl of Essex decides enough's enough, and he orders his artillery to open fire on the king as well. So you can't get clearer here. This is, the parliamentarians have consistently maintained they're not fighting this war against the king. It's his evil counsellors, and it's this bizarre sort of attempt to sort of stick by that. Yet they're firing their cannons directly at the monarch. And that's when the battle commences. So the two sides, they come together, and Rupert starts. Rupert leads the royalist right wing off. And roughly at the same time, the royalist left wing also go. Royalist left wing's under the command of Rupert's second in command, Lord Wilmot, Henry Wilmot. So Rupert's reputation, you've got his reputation that's been building from his time in the European wars, his fearsome reputation about Powick and how successful he's been. There's a lot of myths that have grown up about him and his pet dog. So really, Rupert rides across that expanse. And what he finds is that on the one hand, there's some men in the parliamentarian ranks that defect. So they tear off their orange tawny scarves, they fire their pistols into the ground, and they defect. And that's a huge shock for the parliamentarians. Couple that with Rupert's unorthodox tactics. So he's not going to just ride up to them, slow down, fire the pistols, and then engage. Rupert crashes. He doesn't stop. He doesn't fire any arms. He tells his men, hold fire until you're in amongst the enemy and then fire. So this shock clash of Rupert's men hammering down on the parliamentarians who've just had some defections. The reputation of Rupert as well. You have the ranks of parliamentarian horsemen breaking before Rupert's even engaged them. So it's a very short engagement where very few parliamentarians are really engaged on that wing, and it's broken. And Rupert can't stop his men, and they charge off in pursuit. Wilmot, very much the same. They break through the parliamentarian right wing, and they charge off after them. So it leaves the infantry on both sides. So all good for the royalists. But as the infantry close up, Essex has kept some horsemen in reserve, and they're out of sight. Now, all of a sudden, when the infantry are coming up and clashing, these horsemen emerge and they ride through their own ranks and attack the royalist infantry. And they really, really make a difference. They rout some of the regiments. So you have the royalist ranks starting to waver. They can see that there's horsemen amongst them. These horsemen ride straight through them. They ride up to the artillery, the royalist artillery. Some of them even threatened the young Prince of Wales and Duke of York, who have been taken to safety. Prince of Wales narrowly avoids getting captured. So, it's all happening. It's all in the balance. And this is where the king rides forward. He steadies his troops. The royal standard is even captured. Sir Edmund Verney is killed, and the banner is being taken towards the parliamentarian ranks. And it looks like, actually, the battle's swinging to the parliamentarian favour now. Now, some of the horsemen do return. And that's enough to rescue the royal standard, stabilize the ranks, and both sides really fight to exhaustion. It's 23rd of October. It's extremely cold evening. They are exhausted. It's been a terribly hard fight. It's shocking. It's devastating. You've got friends, family, neighbours fighting each other here. It's hell. And it comes to nightfall, and they just can't fight anymore. But nobody's got the upper hand. So it's almost as though both sides recognise they've fought to stalemate, and they just draw back. They draw back, and then they settle down for the night. And nobody knows what's going to happen next. Is it going to recommence on the morning? The king's told, you can leave the army. He refuses. He stays in his carriage and sleeps in his carriage with his men. And in the morning, battle resumes. The royalists draw up, ready to recommence the fight. But the Earl of Essex, he withdraws. I think they've had enough, and I think he withdraws to Warwick, goes towards Warwick. Now, that's key, because what Essex has done is, by withdrawing towards Warwick, the road to London's now open.
Yeah. And so can I just for people that probably don't know, I mean, obviously you've got the different parts of the army. So the infantry are pikemen, aren't they? And then you have the musketeers and you have the cavalry. Just give people a sense of how they would have actually fought.
Yeah, well, the they really complement each other. So what you've got is the pikes are designed to prevent horses and cavalry. They're designed to protect the musketeers from horses and cavalry, because obviously, these horsemen, they can't ride into a wall of pike poles with metal spikes on the end. They'll veer away. They can't break in. And all the while, the musketeers can fire at the enemy. So yeah, they do complement each other very well. And again, that's in the formations. The artillery doesn't particularly have a huge effect on casualties, particularly huge. It's these musket balls blasting into people. I mean, relatively small musket ball, if it goes into somebody, the exit wound would potentially be as like a dinner plate size, for example. The exit wound, or if it gets lodged inside or takes dirt into the wound, then you've got you might not be killed by the shot; it'll be the infection.
Yeah, so absolutely horrendous. But also, I understand as well that the musket was not that accurate at that point in time either. But I suppose if
Mm.
you've got big walls of musketeers firing all at the same time, it's going to be quite devastating, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Terrible. And then with the pike blocks, you've got this wall that's like called a hedgehog, because these very long ash poles with, say, these metal tips, if they are leveled, then pikemen can force the enemy away. They can gain ground, advance. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, and also, this is the first battle. Obviously, we know we've had that engagement earlier on, but how? And again, a lot of these guys might have been fighting in other types of things in Europe and stuff like that, because that happened. Like you said, that's where some of the generals got their experience from. But your average soldier that's never really actually fought in a battle, what was that like for them? That must have been terrifying.
Absolutely, yeah. For your average soldier, as you say, never fought in battle. They're fighting against people they might know, neighbors, family members. Even just seeing the carnage and the devastation, um, and being in amongst that. The noise, the smell. You can't begin to explain how devastating it is, and the shock of that, the sights alone, having to kill. This is a really big wake up call, for just how bad things have got.
Yeah. And again, I also heard that during the night, as you said, it was quite a cold evening. That some of the wounded were laying out there, and their wounds froze. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the thing, that there's a lot of stories about people that have been seriously, seriously wounded. I think there's one guy, a royalist, who was wounded something like 14 times, I think. And he survived, and that's widely given that the cold, that intensely cold night, stemmed the blood loss enough to for him to survive, and he survived that. And later in the war, he's getting permission to go and take the waters, because of the wounds that are still affecting him, but he still survived. And then there's other people, the Edmund Ludlow says that he had to walk up and down all night in his armor because he was so cold, and if he didn't, then he'd perish. He couldn't eat because his teeth were just firm, so welded closed. Yeah, so in the end, the cold evening ended up taking more care of the wounded than how they would have fared if that hadn't been the case.
Yeah, and again though, but also, this is before medical care and stuff. So during the English Civil Wars, how did they deal with their wounded and their, after a battle? Is that how did that happen, or how did that work out?
I mean, they did try, and there was rudimentary care. I think there are people that are wounded and that are treated. For example, at Marston Moor in Yorkshire, there it said that there was I see a field hospital, not in the sense that we know it, but some sort of treatment centre set up in one of the churches nearby. So, but the question is, for your ordinary soldier, are they going to get there? Who's going to? When will they get there? That's the other thing. She can't hope to treat anybody until the fighting's over, and then that's it in the middle of the night. So you've got people going around trying to steal as well and cut throats. So you might survive the battle, survive the weather, and then someone might come along and just cut your throat and take the belongings. These people that were hoping to make some money off the belongings of people.
Yeah, and again for the people of the villages in the surrounding area, I mean, they've lived in relative peace for some time. I know you said that there's squabbles and things going on, but this must have been a massive shock for them as well. All of a sudden you've got this huge battle takes place and there's just, armies flooded into their little villages and towns, and all of a sudden there's all this bloodshed as well. It must have been really horrendous.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So even people that don't take part in the fighting, their livelihoods could have gone. It could have been trashed by soldiers. They might have said the wrong thing. They might not have professed their loyalty to the right side. You could have their livelihoods trashed. All of their livestock could be taken. Money's gone. Anything that the army needs to survive. So it's sucking the immediate area dry. Anyone that's fit for army service, they might, enlist against their will. Houses could be destroyed. Yeah. Terrible.
Thanks, mate. And I want to just give a shout out. The maps came from the English Civil War, an atlas and concise history of the wars of the Three Kingdoms, which was published by Osprey. So this is definitely worth having in your collection if you like books. It's fantastic. It covers the whole Civil War. But anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about afterwards now. And so why was the battle ultimately considered inconclusive, and how do both sides sort of spin that success afterwards?
Well, so in effect, it was more of a royalist victory, really, because it left the road to London open. And that for them was a tactical outcome that was a victory by every stretch of the imagination. They were free to then march on London. So you've got the shock. The first battle's happened. It's been devastating. Everybody's shocked. That royal army could have then marched directly on London while the capital was in uproar, while they didn't know where their army was, while they were getting conflicting reports, perhaps. And the shock may have caused the capital to surrender, and then the king would have won the war. And that's what Rupert advocated. Rupert immediately said to the king, "Give me a flying column, I will go to London, you follow with the army, and we can dissolve Parliament, get rid of those few vipers in Westminster, parliamentarian leaders." And the king, and this is the king's trouble through the whole war. Say trouble, I suppose it's admirable. He's king of all combatants. So he's the royalist captain general, but he's king of everybody. And he doesn't want to win this civil war by conquest. He knows, he later says in when he's defeated, actually, he knows that conquerors and armies and martial conquest doesn't last long, and it doesn't live in the hearts of people. So he doesn't want that type of victory. And so he says to Rupert, no, he refuses permission to let his nephew march on London. There's another courtier, the Earl of Bristol, who says, don't let him loose, he'll burn London. He's young and hot-headed. And the king thinks, well, we've had the first battle. It's a great shock. the parliamentarian leader surely will be moved to open up negotiations. The people of the capital, he really hopes the people rise up and throw out these parliamentarian leaders, and he can go into London as a conquering hero, not as not by defeating the capital, but invited back. So that's the biggest missed opportunity. I think Rupert would have always questioned that decision. The king is forced in the end that's not going to happen. He's forced to see it's not going to happen. He's going to have to go towards the capital at least. Perhaps if he enters with some men, who knows? And, you get to November when the Royalist army and the Earl of Essex's army, Essex sort of realizes, he gets over that initial shock, realizes how close London has been. And he quickly heads back to the capital. And the Royalists see this and they decide, right, we've got to get there before him. So they are both trying to beat the other to London. Essex gets there just in time. So by the time Charles does approach London, you've got the Earl of Essex's army there who is stopping him. They're blocking his way. He's got the train bands coming out. There's propaganda that is, trying to say that the Royalists are a Catholic army. So you've got everybody stirred up into a passion then to resist the king. And there's not even a battle. The king knows it's hopeless. He needs to withdraw. And he goes to Oxford for the winter.
Mm-hmm. So again, really and truly, if Rupert had got his way, that could have ended the war there and then, I suppose, in a way.
It could have done, and this is a big what if. It had the chance, at least, and what the king, the consequence of the king's decision not to let him go meant that there was no chance that they could take London. If he'd let him go, there could have been a chance, but he would still be up against quite a significantly fortified city. If they'd have stood firm, Rupert wouldn't have had enough troops to assault the city, so he wouldn't have been able to take it. He couldn't take Windsor Castle when he tried, for example. He tried to get Windsor Castle, and just didn't have enough men to take it, or the cannons and the artillery to get it. So yeah, but at least there would have been a small chance that it could have ended things. And this continues through the war. Every time Rupert spends a year from that point pulling the Royalist army up by the bootstrings, getting them into a position where they can then win it again. And the king doesn't want to march on London again. And he says, no, we'll besiege Gloucester in 1643. And that's a missed opportunity entirely, because the parliamentarian army are able to reinforce Gloucester. So yeah, there's missed opportunities because the king is an idealist. He doesn't want to win by conquest. But I think it's really it's really interesting though about Rupert. This is what interested me looking at his biography. It's Edge Hill, I think, that makes him this demon. So for the parliamentarians, they see his record, they see how he's done it at Powick Bridge, they see how much their forces have trembled before him at Edge Hill, and they really set out to demonize him. And the propaganda machine goes into overdrive, and he's vilified in these news sheets. And I'll tell you just very briefly. What they say is that there's rumours going wild after Edge Hill. So rumours reach Holland that Rupert's got cloven feet, like he's a devil. It reaches Charles I's daughter in Holland. People say that he killed thousands of men by his own hand at Edge Hill. So you can see instantly here that the hatred against Rupert from the parliamentarian side is really spiking. The propaganda is out of control, portraying him, cloven feet, for example. And there's rumours that he's actually been killed. It's not him. It's another Knight of the Garter that's killed, the Earl of Lindsay. but the parliamentarians really wanted to be Rupert, so they spread a rumor that he's been killed, and there's an imposter in the royalist camp that's masquerading as Prince Rupert because they don't want to admit it. So, Rupert, he's instantly put at the heart of the royalist cause.
That's fantastic. Thanks for adding that. I really appreciate that. Okay, so how did the first major clash influence military strategy in the coming years of the conflict? What do they learn from this battle, do you think?
I think both sides learned immediately that battles could not necessarily decide the outcome. Certainly one battle wasn't going to decide it. You could have a major battle, like Marston Moor was the biggest battle of the Civil Wars. It's not going to dictate the outcome per se. It's still going to take a lot of time after that to achieve victory. So Rupert addresses the Royalist Council of War straight after Edgehill, and he says, look, now you need to start reinforcing places, fortifying towns, fortifying castles. That's what you need to do, because I've seen it in the Low Countries on the continent. I've seen how if you fortify these places, they can hold out for significant times. You have a flying army that can, reinforce them if needed, and that's how you're going to hold out against the enemy. So he's advocating. He's not saying put it all into defence, but he's saying you need to start looking at fortifications as a way of stopping the enemy from defeating, because there's a risk that if they killed or captured the king, that could be the end of the war. So they need to strengthen their position so that one battle doesn't actually achieve that.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, let's talk about the actual the commemoration side of things, and that obviously now before we started recording, you mentioned that you've been about 20 years since you've been to the battlefield. I think you said. Myself, I've been there. Some of it's accessible, some of it's not. Now every year, a big shout out to the Sealed Knot. They would do a reenactment there. I've done two myself. Commemorative march from Kineton Church. And some of the battlefields actually MOD land, so you can't access it anyway unless you get permission from the MOD. But what were your memories about going to the battlefield, Mark? Do you remember much about that?
Yeah. So the first time I went was around 2005, I think it was, and there was a retired army officer that gave a couple of us a tour. And we started in it's like a folly, I think it's an 18th century folly, like castle pub that overlooks the battlefield. So we started there, and it's an amazing sight, definitely, looking at it from there. But then we wound through some of these narrow lanes into the MOD section. And it was just, I think you mentioned it as well, the feeling that it's like a hollow feeling. You go there and it seemed just empty. But then I did go back and I drove there. I think 2020 or 2020. And I drove up the public road, or like a public lane that's at the foot of Edge Hill, and that was early one morning, and that was very atmospheric. Even just seeing there was someone riding a horse, and just seeing the horse and the rider going along with Edge Hill in the background was quite something. And I remember going into the church, and they've got a display, so they've got dummies with the costumes that would have been worn, and I think there's a display case with some artifacts in it. But that was deserted that morning. I remember going in, and the lights came on, and this sort of white dummy's face of just appeared. So yeah.
So it gave you a bit of a shock then.
Yes, it did. Yeah, it just
But I think when you're so invested in something and interested in something, I think when you go to a place where something like that happens, you get I can't explain because I've been there myself. Like I've been to Gettysburg, say for instance, and I've
Mm.
had because I'm so into it. I just your experience is just better because you
Yeah,
have an understanding of it as I'm trying to get to. So maybe you experience some of that because obviously you're so into it. Maybe that's why you experienced it the way you experienced it. As like
yeah.
blogs went there, did probably wouldn't understand what happened there. They would probably wouldn't even get that experience.
Well, I can tell you if my wife went there, she would she wouldn't
Yeah,
get the
same,
experience. She
exactly the
says
same. Yeah.
it's another field, but it's not just a
Yeah,
field.
that's right.
There's
It's
so
it's
much
not a
more
field,
to it.
love. Yeah, I've been there, mate, plenty of times. Yeah, yeah. But
But I
again,
think it's the emotional connection, isn't it? Like you say,
yeah.
you know what's happened there. You know the enormity of it. Um, you've got the images in your mind. You've got the real life characters that you're thinking about. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for talking about the battle, but let's talk about yourself because, again, we sat down did a podcast thing in 2022. We did an episode about the execution of Charles I. But since then, you've been very busy, Mark, haven't you? So I think at the time you only had the one book at the time, maybe two. I'm not sure, can't remember. But you've always had your social media pages, I know. But so Mark's on Facebook. Go and check that out, Mark Turnbull Author. Great little website.
Thanks.
And so go and check those out, please, people. But yeah, tell us about your books. And your latest one, I believe, is the Charles the First one. Is that right?
Latest is Rupert that
Oh,
came
sorry. Do
out.
apologise. Yeah.
No, it's all right. That came out in May. But yeah, The King's Spy. So I'd started writing fiction, and I always wanted to write fiction as far back as I can remember. About more than 20 years, I would say, maybe 25. Just as soon as I knew about the Civil War and read about it, I just thought, wow, this is amazing. I want to know more about it, and I'd love to write fiction, sort of like feel like I can get into it, enter the period. So that's why I started fiction. So The King's Spy came out of that. And then I was asked, well, would you like to write a biography of Charles the First? And I thought, well, yeah, absolutely. um, and that's Charles the First private life. So with that one, I just wanted to delve into, because there've been a lot of biographies of Charles, but I wanted to specifically understand his childhood, because that's not really, it's glossed over a lot. So what made the man? Where did his character form? Who was he? He's more than just this formal Van Dyke portrait. He's got his emotions and his worries and his fears like everybody else. So that was really interesting to get more into the heart of who he was. And then after that, I just thought it's got to be Rupert. Because the two of them, and I found that when I was doing the research for Charles, and one of the things that I wanted to do with nonfiction is forget about what's on my bookshelf that's been written in the past, get into the archives, get all the primary sources and the materials from lots of different archives, put them together, build a picture and interpret it that way, and then see perhaps how it's been interpreted before. And I was finding that you get into Charles's mindset, and then you have that crossover with Rupert, and you've got very similar characters in their hobbies and what they enjoyed and their sense of chivalry, but very different characters as well. Very different characters in other regards, and I could see this crossover between the two of them through the Civil War. How one operated compared to the other. And that's when I thought, well, that's going to be really interesting to see the Royalist war effort from both points of view. So yeah, with Rupert, it was just a treasure trove. You open up the archives and you think or you think everything's been written about Rupert, and then you realize, boy, there's so much, not least the women in his life that just sort of came out there. And that tells you so much about him as well as a person. fascinating. So
Excellent.
uh,
And so, yeah, getting to go into the archives, I suppose that was, like you said, an amazing experience to actually see that source material. But that's amazing.
oh yeah, just touching it, seeing the seals on it, um, the handwriting, the writing. You look at it first, I think, what on earth does that say?
Yeah.
How does that even make any sort of English word?
Yeah.
um, and yeah, so like I found that the more I studied, obviously the easier it became. But it's just so strange when you look at a letter and then you look at it and you look at it, and then it gradually starts to transform into something a bit more readable.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just opening these letters. Some of them are coded as well, still. And I'd looked at letters that have been partially decoded from cipher, and sort of started to try and build up a cipher key. And I built it up enough to sort of decode some letters that Rupert wrote, which haven't been decoded. And it's just amazing to find out. It's like going back in time and just asking them a question.
Yeah. And
Oh,
ladies and gentlemen, I will be leaving links to Mark's pages and website and books in the podcast description. Well, Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again about the English Civil Wars, and I'm sure it won't be the last time that we have this conversation. But all that
thank
is
you.
left to say is thank you very much for giving up your day and coming and talk to me.
Oh no problem. I love talking Civil War, and like I think like what you said. My wife and my friends are not that interested in it. So yeah, any opportunity to.
Exactly. That's how I feel as well, my friend. And so all that is left to say is cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.